greet your fellow fly fishers. Welcome back to my 10-part series on fly fishing for beginners. And today we're going to talk about casting. This is part 7. I'm going to break it up into 2 parts. Let's call it 7A and 7B. In 7A, we're just going to kind of go over some general safety precautions and other tips, and then we're going to do a pick up and lay down cast, which is a foundation for almost all other casts in fly fishing, so I think it's really important. We'll spend a little time on that. We're going to build in some false casting. In part 7B, we're going to go over a roll cast, which is a very important cast, along with a bow and arrow cast. I'll get into detail about those when we go do them. But first, a little bit of advice. If you're going to cast, practice or not, always wear eye protection and even a hat. When you go fishing, for sure wear a hat. But when you're practicing, even though I am practicing with a yarn fly, there is no hook here, you don't want to get hit in the eye, and if you're casting with a friend, you don't want a rod tip in the eye. So here's another little tip. I'm going to show you how to line your rod. So I've already assembled my rod, and it may sound silly, but a lot of people, when they start out, they try to put the fly or the tippet through the guides. That, if you drop it, it will fall right back through. So what you want to do is you want to strip off about, I don't know, 15 feet of line or so. And then what you do is grab the junction of the leader and fly line and go back about 4 or 5 inches and fold your fly line over on itself like that. And now you just run this up through the guides. Now the reason for doing that is if you drop this, if you drop it, oh, it slipped out of my hand, it's going to stop and it won't go all the way back through, which typically it goes through when you're almost done. So that's a little tip for lining your rod. So that's taking that. Let me just finish it since I started. And then you'll pull it through, and now you have a little line to start casting with. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is how you grip the rod. People, especially me when I first started, and for a long time, I over gripped the rod. You do not need a death grip on this rod. If you do and you cast a lot, you're just going to ask for some problems. Some, depending how old you are and healthy you are, you might get some pain in your hand or your elbow, or just don't over grip it. A good thing to do is to turn the reel sideways and hold onto the rod and loosen your grip until the reel just slides down. Let gravity pull it down. That's about how hard you want to hold the rod. Okay, not any harder. Okay, now there's certain ways to grip the rod. There's 3 popular ways. One is with your thumb on top. Most people cast with their thumb on top. I tend not to do this. I used to when I started, but you get a little too wristy. And when you have a big wrist cast, it can create some problems. Although it's a style thing, and you're going to develop your own style as you go along. The second way, especially for short distance casts, a lot of people will put their index finger on top of the rod. And then there's a third way, I'll call it a key grip, which is you just grab it with basically these 2 fingers, and you form a V, and that's how you hold the rod. That's your grip. Okay, remember, don't over grip. Another thing I'd like to talk about is balance on the rod. So you can see this rod's fairly well balanced right here at almost the top of the cork. I would grab this closer to the top. I like to have a little more weight down here when you're casting. It's nice and balanced. You won't fatigue out as fast. Okay, and last but not, well, this is not the last, but after you're done casting or fishing, it's good to clean your line. So there's a lot of different products out there to clean it, and to add some silicone. This is one from Scientific Anglers. I use some of this and just cotton pads, and I will strip out my line and clean it with this. You don't want to leave a lot of this on, but a nice coating. It helps protect your line, helps it slide through the guide. So clean your line almost after every time you use it, really. If you read the manufacturer's instructions on most lines, it'll tell you to do that. Okay, now I use these to cast too. I use targets. These are just soccer cones. I write the distance on them. They're really cheap. You can buy a ton of them for $9 or $10, and they're great to cast too. Some people like to put a hoop around these, so you put this in the middle and a hoop, and it gives you a bigger target to cast to. That's fine. Anyway, this is what I use, along with a tape measure to know how far I'm casting. A little more than you need to know right now, but that's it. Okay, now when you're casting, keep in mind, in an overhead traditional fly cast, there's really 5 things I want you to kind of keep in your head. One is, you don't want to cast with slack. And when we get out there, I'll show you what that means exactly. Because if you have slack in your line, it's hard to load your rod. So you want to let this rod do the work for you. It's a 9-foot lever or 8.5 foot or whatever you have. It's a long lever-like spring. You want this to do the work for you. So slack will not allow you to load the rod properly. So get slack out of your system. We'll talk about that a little more in depth. Number 2 is, you have to pause when you cast. When we do the pick up and lay down, we're going to pick up the line, we're going to pick up the rod, and we're going to stop back here, and we're going to wait until the line unrolls in the back. Now we're going to cast at 35 feet, so that's going to be about a 2 count. 1, 2, not 2 seconds, a 1, 2. Then you're going to pause on the forward cast before you lay your rod down. So there's always, you have to pause. Okay. Third, you want to cast in a plane. So you don't want to whip around like this. You want to cast like you're almost pretend you're scraping an imaginary wall with your rod tip. So you stay in the same plane. If you don't, your line's going to follow your rod tip. A lot of times people tend to cast across their body, and the line will whip around to the left if they're right-handed. So you'll miss your target. Fourth is, and this is a little more advanced, but I want you to just keep thinking about it, is the casting arc. The casting arc is going to increase as the line gets longer and the rod loads more, because, you know, remember from the first part, I said difference in casting a fishing line when you're just like a spinning rod or a bait caster. In fly fishing, you're casting the weight of the line. So for a 35-foot pickup and lay down, which I'll get to, and you know, when you go out there, you're going to cast to about, imagine a big clock off to the right, about from 1 o'clock to 10 o'clock. That's your casting arc. Okay. So keep in mind the arc. It gets smaller the closer you are. So if you're casting 20 feet away, it has a very small arc. If you're casting 50 or 60 feet away, you have a bigger arc. Okay, and finally, last but not least, is the amount of force you apply to your rod. Okay, you have to have the proper amount of force based on the distance you're casting. So keep that in mind. And when you apply the force, almost 6 things really. When you cast, you want to accelerate. You want to start slow and end fast. You start slow and end fast. Start slow and end fast. All that stuff will come to you. I just wanted you to keep that in mind when you're casting. There's tons of videos out there besides mine, so I would look at a lot of them if I were you. And before we go out and cast, I'll say one more thing. If you want to take this sport to a higher level and you're just beginning, I suggest you go to this Fly Fishers International website and look for a casting instructor in your area, or many fly shops will have a casting instructor. It would be really beneficial to get a lesson or 2 lessons or so before you fish. So when you go out there, you know, you're not flailing around. Anyway, let's go out and cast. I'll see you out in the field. All right, see you then. Okay, I'm going to perform the pickup and lay down cast for you. Before we cast, let's get into a little more detail about our stance. So if you're a right-handed caster, dominant person, you're going to want to stand with your right foot in front, especially for short distance casts. And what that's going to do is it's going to eliminate you crossing your body, or at least it's going to help square you up so you cast more on that plane and keep that rod on that imaginary wall. A lot of people cast like this, but it can give you a tendency to do this. Now, when you're fishing, sometimes you just don't have the luxury of picking your foot position, so you're just going to do the best you can. Try to square your body. And I'm casting to a target. I don't know if you can see in the background, I have a tape on the ground. I have a target 35 feet away. So I'm going to have my right foot in front of me. I also talked about a little bit about slack. And slack is when I have a lot of line piled up in front of me, and I can't load the rod properly. So you want to try to eliminate slack. I'll show you that when I get over there. Okay, let's break that cast down. I hope you noticed I had my right foot in front of me. I also imagine there's a big clock off to the right side of my body, which is this side. And as you watch the video, you notice I stopped my rod on the back cast at about 1 o'clock, and on the forward cast at about 10 o'clock. And then I'll follow the line down with my rod tip to the ground. Okay, so let's break it down, and I have 6 steps to this cast. One is you're going to start with your rod tip down and your line straight out in front of you. That's step 1. Step 2 is you're going to lift the rod slowly and then accelerate to a stop at about 1 o'clock. That's step 2. Step 3 is you're going to pause for a count of 1, 2 with about 35 feet of line out. Step 4 is you're going to forward cast. Step 5 is you're going to stop and pause again for about a 2 count, 1, 2, and then you're going to follow your line down with the rod tip back to the ground. So that's step 1, line out in front. Step 2, slowly lift, accelerate to a stop. Step 3, pause. Step 4, forward cast. Step 5, pause. Step 6, slowly follow the line down with your rod tip to the ground or the water. And here we're practicing on, of course, as you can see, grass. So that's the 6 steps to that cast. If you don't have a rod, you can practice with a pool noodle or anything. You can watch yourself in the mirror. You can just mimic the motion. I do tend to cast a little bit of shoulder up and down and some forearm. I try not to use much wrist. I hope you noticed that. So the next thing I want to show you guys is if you have a wind, if you're fishing and you have a wind coming off of your right side, this is of course if you're a right-handed caster, and if it's left, it's the other side, but let's assume you're right-handed and the wind is going to come off this direction. You don't want to cast on your right side because that will blow the fly line back into you. So all you want to do is we call it an off shoulder or non-dominant side cast. So when you grip the rod, all you have to do simply is rotate your forearm over so the rod tip ends up on the other side of your body. And in that case, it's the same casting motion. You lift, accelerate to a stop, forward cast to a stop, and drop the rod down. See, I haven't changed my casting stroke. You'll see a lot of people bring the rod across their body like this. Well, it's harder on your shoulder, and you have muscle memory. You're going to build up muscle memory with this stroke right here, so it's so easy just to rotate your wrist. That's going to be an offside cast. Now let's get a bit into why we do this pick up and lay down. The pick up and lay down is going to be a useful cast when you're fishing. One, you can reposition your fly. And two, if you're dry fly fishing, which is, as a beginner, I'm recommending you do, you can dry off your fly as you begin to learn to false cast. Now, again, let's take it back to fishing. I don't recommend you false cast a lot because you're false casting over fish. It's not good, but you can change position as you false cast and change your position to cast to another area. So let me demonstrate the pick up and lay down a few more times. I'm going to build that into a false cast, and then you can see me lay it back down at 40 feet. Okay, that's the pick up and lay down, and then you saw me build it up into false casting, which you're going to want to learn how to do. So when you false cast, instead of dropping it back down on that forward cast, you're going to pause for a 2 count, and you're going to bring it back for another 2 count and 2 count. So pause, stop, pause, stop, pause, stop, pause, stop, pause, and then you're going to lay it down. And I showed you to change positions, you just go around like a turret, almost. Well, you saw how I did that. I just, on my cast, I slightly changed direction with each cast until I was back upstream where I wanted to shoot to my target. Coming back, I hope you come back for 7B, where we're going to do the roll cast, and we're going to do a bow and arrow cast. Okay, thanks again, and I'll see you soon.